Welcome to Historical. I'm your host, and today we're going to be talking about this guy that loved hooking up with prostitute. This story is one of those situations that sounds unbelievable at first, but once you start going through it, everything begins to make sense in a very unsettling way. So stay with me because this one gets interesting very quickly. Let's get into it. In 1955, a 29-year-old guy named Joe Conforte is living in Nevada. Now, Joe really likes the business of prostitution. He likes it so much that he decides to open his own brothel in a place called Wadsworth. It's nothing fancy, just a few beat-up mobile trailers parked in a line. But the customers don't seem to care, they just want to pay for services. Back then in Nevada, the laws regarding brothels were pretty vague. They were operating in a sort of legal gray area. There wasn't a clear ban, but it didn't mean the police couldn't show up and shut him down whenever they felt like it. Some counties were a lot tougher than others. Joe figured out a simple solution. Whenever the local law started breathing down his neck, he would just hook up his trailers to a truck and move the whole operation to a different county. It worked. Joe started making a lot of money, which he really enjoyed. He liked living a flashy life, wearing expensive silk suits and driving nice cars. But eventually, he ran into a real problem. He caught the attention of the local district attorney, a guy named Bill. Bill hated everything Joe stood for. He thought Joe was immoral and a bad influence, so he started targeting him. Bill would officially ban Joe from his county, and whenever Joe ignored the ban, Bill had him arrested again and again. Joe was frustrated. He felt like he was just a regular businessman providing a service, and he couldn't understand why Bill was picking on him. So Joe decided that if Bill wanted to play dirty, he would do the same. He came up with a plan to dig up some dirt on Bill to get some leverage. In 1959, Joe set up a scheme where he had an underage girl falsely accuse Bill of having sex with her. He tried to use this to blackmail the DA, but Bill wasn't going to roll over. He decided to strike back. Bill wired himself with a recording device and called Joe, acting like he wanted to talk things over and settle their differences. They agreed to meet, and during that conversation, Joe bragged and admitted to the whole extortion plot. Bill had him on tape. Joe was arrested, convicted, and in 1960 he was sentenced to 3 to 5 years in prison. But Joe wasn't the kind of guy to let jail time stop him. Even behind bars, he kept running his operations. He actually turned the prison gaming room into a full-blown high-end casino. Surprisingly, the prison staff didn't seem to mind. They let him run it and keep the profits. Joe used that money to hire a personal cook, a maid, and even someone to fan him while he played games. It was honestly pretty ridiculous. Years passed, and by 1965, Joe got out of prison. He was ready to get back to business, but this time, he played it smarter. He wanted to make sure he wouldn't get shut down again, so he started building up goodwill. He made friends with local politicians, donated to charities, built a trailer park for low-income families, and even handed out turkeys for Thanksgiving. The locals started to like him, and he became the guy politicians went to when they needed help winning an election. Around that time, he bought a small place from another guy and took it over. It was called the Mustang Ranch, and unlike his old trailer setup, this one was in a fixed location. In 1971, using all that political influence he'd built up, he fought to get his brothel legalized. It actually worked, and the Mustang Ranch became the first legal brothel in the United States. Joe became a celebrity. He was even featured on the cover of Rolling Stone. He was pulling in millions of dollars a year throughout the 70s. But then, things got complicated. For some reason, Joe decided to get into boxing promotion. He signed a heavyweight fighter named Oscar and started promoting his matches, which brought in even more cash. But then Oscar started acting out. He began getting a little too close to Joe's wife, Sally. They were seen having dinners together, and rumors started flying that they were having an affair. To make it worse, Oscar started bragging around town that he was going to marry Sally and take over Joe's brothel and boxing empire. When the rumors reached Joe, he decided Oscar had to go. He offered him a bunch of money to just leave the country, but Oscar refused. In 1976, Oscar showed up at the Mustang Ranch looking for a fight. Joe had apparently already told his security guards to shoot Oscar on sight if he caused trouble. So the guard shot him and Oscar didn't survive. The police arrived, the guard was arrested, and he eventually pleaded guilty to manslaughter, getting 2 years in prison. A lot of people felt like Joe had just gotten away with ordering a murder. But the law caught up with Joe in 1977. He was arrested and convicted of tax evasion, hit with a 20-year prison sentence, and ordered to pay $18 million in back taxes. Before he had to turn himself in, Joe fled the country to Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. Brazil didn't have an extradition treaty for that specific crime at the time, so he was safe. His wife Sally stayed behind in the US and filed for bankruptcy so the IRS couldn't seize the Mustang Ranch. Even from Brazil, Joe kept running the place behind the scenes, funneling the money to himself. He eventually sold the ranch to his lawyer as a front, still calling all the shots and taking the profits until the IRS caught on. They arrested the lawyer and threatened him with prison time unless he flipped on Joe. The lawyer finally caved, but it didn't matter for Joe. He stayed in Brazil, living his best life, and the government couldn't touch him. He lived out the rest of his days there, never stepping foot in an American prison for those final crimes, and eventually died in 2019 of old age.